Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. I love our family Sundays. All of our kids coming up to get their bags and things they can piddle with and join in this morning. And then I get to teach, and you get to worship with your children and let them be a part of your family and the things that are going on in your life. So we do this on purpose. The last Sunday of every month, which that's today. The last Sunday of every month, we do a family service where we bring our children into the auditorium for both services, and we do that so they can be with you. And I know there are a lot of parents that will look at that and go, that's the reason we come to church. But no, we want them to be with you. We want them to be able to watch you worship, be a part of it, and we get it. They're allowed to wiggle. They're going to make noise. They're kids. We expect kids to be kids. But you're modeling something for your children, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. And then we also decided a few years ago, whenever there's a fifth Sunday in a month, we just do one service, and it's kind of cool. We bring everybody together from both services, and all the kids are in here, and we have a good time with that. So that's one of these Sundays. In case this is your first Sunday, and you're going, wow, that's a bunch of kids. Don't they have some place like a holding cell? No, we don't. We don't do child care at Living Water. We do children's ministry at Living Water. We're not just going to watch your kids. We're going to teach them about Jesus and reinforce what you're teaching them about Jesus at home. So we're excited by it. So all that was kind of a plug for our children's ministry. Thank you, Miss Crystal. We're glad you're here today. Are y'all glad to be here? Cool. We are in week 3 of our series entitled The Rest of the Year. It's a little bit of a play on words on the idea of rest. We are starting off the year, like we've done a few years, with 21 days of prayer and fasting, which, by the way, that ends today. If you started at the time most of us did, then that 21 days ends today. Hopefully you've been praying. Now listen, just because it ends doesn't mean you stop praying. Okay? It's not like God says pray 21 days out of the year, and once you got them taken care of, you don't have to pray anymore. All right? Praying, fasting, however God leads you in that, continue to do it. But we've been very purposeful as a church, and we've given you some things to pray for our church and for people individually and for our ministries and different things. And I'm going to share with you straight up, right up front, 2025 has started off very difficult for me. Remember, I do confessions from a pastor. It feels like quite a bit. I've had multiple funerals that we've needed to do. We have one this afternoon. And then we've had some real difficulties with different things in our church, people that have faced unexpected surgeries. And I'm going to share something, and I just want your prayers with it. And those of you that know who I'm talking about, I'm going to share. They've allowed me, and I'm going to. Donnie and Vicky, they are just a beautiful, simple couple in our church. They usually sit right back here on the back row. And if you've missed their smiles, they smile and wave at everybody. They're super kind. They've been here as long as we've been a church. About 3 weeks ago, I went with Donnie to a doctor's appointment, and Donnie was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. Liver cancer, it's also in his lungs and in his bones. So we're walking through a process that Donnie knows he's going to meet Jesus pretty soon. And the only thing that he wanted with him while he was at Hendersonville Health and Rehab, which is a beautiful, wonderful place, is he wanted his wife, Vicky, to be with him. So Vicky's been able to stay with him. They've done an amazing job. Well, just the other day, Thursday, I believe, Vicky started struggling a little bit, and we ended up having to take Vicky to the hospital and discovered that Vicky has just a terrible condition with her heart. And only about 10% of her heart is actually functioning. So Vicky's going to meet Jesus soon, and Donnie's going to meet Jesus soon. And that's been hard. And I have been so thrilled to pastor you all as one of the pastors here at our church, because I've seen so many of our church owners show up for Donnie and Vicky and visit them. And it's not funny. Donnie has diabetes, and people will walk in with candy bars and Mountain Dew, and you can see the nurses going, he has diabetes. I'm like, he has stage 4 liver cancer. Let the man eat. So we're just giving him all he wants. If you want to go visit Donnie, take him a vanilla milkshake, and you'll be his best friend. It'll be great. But I want you to pray for them. And also, I was talking with my wife. We had a couple of days just kind of resting over the last few. And I was sharing with her with doctors' phone calls and cardiologists and all the different things. I said, isn't it cool that maybe God is going to not allow either one of them to have to live without the heartache of losing the other? And a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of you have had to experience that heartache. But that's what's going on in the life of our church right now, and you're going, man, I didn't know about all that stuff. Well, that's part of what we do here at our church. We care for people, we take care of them. So 2025 has been heavy on me so far, and we're not done with January yet. So I'm like, okay, God, let's knock all this out and let's move forward. So the idea of trying to find rest has been hard, even though I've intentionally tried to take it and others of you tried to take it, and I'm going to make the sermon about me, so don't feel like you didn't come to hear a biography or autobiography of Tony. That's not what it's about. But I wanted to share my struggle with rest, and then tell you where we're going to walk with this today, because I'm going to be extremely practical as we walk through today's message. If you were here the first week, well, you weren't here the first week because we had snow for the first time in 1,000 days in Western North Carolina, and it shut the church down that Sunday, so we did online. And Kyle brought us a message that week that started off this idea of rest. He used scripture out of the book of Matthew, and I'm going to put it on the screen, kind of catch you up, and then I'm going to get extremely practical today and even give you a way to make a commitment this morning. Kyle started off with these verses in Matthew 11:28. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you," say it. Oh, say it like you mean it. I will give you. You're going to help me this morning, okay? I'm a little tired, so you're going to help me out this morning. I will give you rest. Now understand, when Jesus gave these words, he's talking to people in his time and also time forward, that he understands that a lot of us think that the world will only spin if we keep it spinning. Anybody else guilty of that? Don't raise your hands. If you're married to somebody who's guilty of it, just elbow them one time in the ribs, and that'll be great, all right? We all have times in our lives that we feel like, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. I've shared with you guys before. For me personally, my struggle is, hey, God, you're so busy. If you'll just scoot over a little bit, I'll one-cheek it on your throne, and I'll help you out just a little bit. But Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Jesus says, trust me with the things of this world. That's not only now, that's also eternity. If you're somebody who doesn't know Jesus, if you've never given your life to Jesus, you have to trust him with eternity and rest there as well. So Kyle started us off with the laying down the foundation and saying, this is where we've got to go. We've got to come to Jesus. We've got to do that. Last week, I took it a little bit further and started moving into this idea of Sabbath and how God created the Sabbath. He created rest, and it's something that we should do. I used one of the verses in Exodus, chapter 31, verse 17. Again, on the screens, it says this: "In 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. On the seventh day, he was." Now, if you remember from last week's message, and I know some of you weren't here and you're going, wait a minute, I'm not catching. All right, it was last week. Remember, the word to rest in the Hebrew means to cease from creating. It means to stop, to take a break, to wind down, to cease from creating. And then the word refreshed means to breathe freely and recover. So, when God instituted the Sabbath, when God instituted rest, and we know God doesn't need rest. God didn't need rest, but he instituted it for us. Later on in Matthew, I actually told the story last week how Jesus said that the Sabbath was created for man, that it's made for us to rest. It's part of our life. We should do it. Matter of fact, when we're aligned ourselves to God, we're aligned with his goodness, and it's good. But I'm just going to ask you a question. How in the world are we supposed to take a Sabbath and rest in today's world? If you got small children at home, you're going, when does a 2-year-old rest? If you got teenagers at home, you just do it at a higher tone and angrily. We got a crazy world. And then if you're trying to live life as a Christian, you understand that Christianity is kind of defined by sacrifice and Sabbath, by sacrificing our lives and also being able to rest and understand God. You start beginning to ask questions. I actually found a couple of questions just on a quick Google search. What does it look like for a Christian, for a Christ follower to actually say, I'm going to include a Sabbath, a rest in my life? And then you ask the question, are there any guidelines in Scripture? Are there any things that inform us about this rest? And then how do we navigate it with our calendars? How do we put it in a place? What do we do? Well, actually, that's where I'm going to go this morning. Again, very, very practical this morning with a commitment at the end for you to do. Let me share this with you. In Hebrews chapter 4, the writer of Hebrews, and I like the book of Hebrews because it's one of the books in the Bible, we don't know who wrote it. Some people think Paul, some people think Luke, other people think that it was one of the ladies that was with Jesus in his time, but we really don't know who wrote it. Either way, it's scripture and it's there. So Hebrews 4, verse 9, the writer has just been giving kind of the backstory, talking about the children of Israel that were being led by Moses in the wilderness and how they had gotten right to the edge of the promised land, right to the edge. It was actually called the promised land and the place of rest, where the children of Israel would no longer be wandering, and they were right there at the edge. But when they got right there to the edge, some of them said, no, we're not going. It's too scary. We can't trust God. And they missed God's rest. The writer of Hebrews has just told a little bit about that story, and then he or she shares this in verse 9. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters into God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort. Now, I want to just stop for a second. That word, the idea of making every effort, this is one of the only times in all of the Bible that it says to make an effort to do something. Now, isn't that a crazy thing? God's actually telling us through the writer of Hebrews, I want you to make an effort to enter into that rest. Now, there's a spiritual rest for those of us, if we've accepted Christ, we've given him our life. The Bible talks about an eternity, that when we enter in this life, our last breath here is our next breath in eternity, and you're going to spend eternity in a place either called heaven or a place called hell, and that place of heaven is a place of rest for sure, and a place of reward for accepting Jesus. So there's speaking to that, but there's also speaking to the rest that we have to choose to enter into in our walk with God. So he says, let us make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following their example, the example of the Israelites, and their disobedience. Now, as he set up these verses previously, again, he's talking about the children of Israel, but he's beginning to tell us about what rest looks like. And I do love the understanding that true eternal rest can only be found in Jesus. So here's where I want to get really practical, and maybe for just a second, I'm not going to let you ask questions, but I'm going to make sure I'm being very, very clear, okay? When I'm speaking of a Sabbath rest, I'm not talking about your normal day. Because we all kind of have this rhythm to life a little bit, and I'll use that word again here in just a minute. But we all kind of have a rhythm to life. We get up in the morning, or if you work third shift, you get up at night, whatever it may be. You go to work, you work your 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 10 hours a day. You come home, you make a meal, you watch a little TV, or whatever your nightly routine is, and then you lay down and you go to rest, and you start that routine all back over again. That is the natural rhythm of life, and there's really nothing you can do about that other than die. That's just the rhythm of life. It is what it is. The idea of Sabbath rest is a time that you have chosen, that you have said, this is a time that I'm setting aside. This is a time. You're doing it right now. You're spending some of your Sabbath rest by saying, I'm going to gather together with God's people in church. I'm going to come. I'm going to worship together. You're going to recognize that in our lives, God's going to be with us through the difficulties, through the good times, and it's our responsibility to run to the Father when we're hurting, and you're going to worship together. You're going to have an opportunity to give together, and then you're going to listen, and hopefully you're going to apply things to your life. This is part of that rest. But this idea of Sabbath rest is saying, what are you setting aside? Is there a block of time that you intentionally, weekly say, I am setting everything aside? Now, I can feel the pushback. Pastor, you don't understand my schedule. I couldn't squeeze in an hour in a week if you paid me $1 million to squeeze in an hour. I beg to differ. If I offered you $1 million to squeeze in an hour, how many of you could squeeze in an hour? The whole flipping church. Exactly right. Well, maybe what God's offering in this rest is more important than $1 million. Maybe what God's offering is peace and rest in Him. So, practical. I'm going to give you a few things. Are you ready? You'll see them up on the screen. If you want to, people like to take pictures of those. You can go to our website, and the sermon notes are on there. You'll see all these, whatever you want to do. But hopefully you'll kind of pay attention and be able to take these in place, all right? So, one of the characteristics of someone who follows Christ is someone who rests, someone who understands what this is, to Sabbath and to rest. But what does it look like when you're making these decisions? So let me help you out. Number one, here it is. There's a rhythm to rest. There's a rhythm to rest. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be practical. It needs to be something that you plan and that you put into place. We actually talked a little bit about this last week with God's example of God taking a rest during creation. Let me show you. Genesis chapter 2. They'll put it up on the screen. And I'm going to step out here and read it from the screen, so you'll be right here with me. You ready? By the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all of His work. Now, why did I underline those statements that I put in there? Because there's a little gem. I used these verses last week, but there's a little gem in there, a little diamond in there that I didn't share last week, a little nugget of gold in there that I didn't give you last week so I could do it this week. Because I want to show you something. It says very intentionally in the original language and even in the translation that we have in the English that by the seventh day, that terminology means that God created 6 days and rest was part of His creation. So in other words, creation wasn't finished until God rested. If we understand this correctly, it means that when you're doing a job, when you're working, when you have a routine of life, that your work is not completed until you've taken the opportunity to rest. Matter of fact, let me give you a statement this way to see if you can understand a little bit better. Rest is the element that finishes the work. Work is unfinished until there is rest from the work. It's not done. So often in our culture, in our society, the way we look at it is I go to work, I work, I-ho, it's off. Come on, people, help me out. We go to work and we're like, going to work, got to do the work so I can get home and rest. Well, in actuality, the way that God speaks of this rest, of this Sabbath rest, is that your work is not complete until you've completed the rest from the work. Does that make sense? Nod your head this way. Or just go, we don't know, but I'm still going to nod my head this way because you need to finish this message, all right? So the truth is, rest is part of the work. Until we choose to rest, until we choose to intentionally take a time, our work is not done. So there's a rhythm to rest, and God puts it in there. All right, Tony, I appreciate the fact that you pointed out that there's a rhythm to rest. I appreciate that you told me that it's more than just laying my head down at night. It's more than putting the kids to bed and getting a moment of silence. I appreciate your telling me that. But what is it revealing about me if I can't find time to rest? Well, I'm so glad you asked. That's number 2. Are you ready? Rest reveals the condition of our hearts. Remember, I shared with you a few minutes ago one of my struggles. I'm going to be straight up with you every single time I preach. It's a requirement of standing up here, I believe, to be honest and authentic. One of my struggles quite often is that when I get overwhelmed, I forget a mandate that God gave me. See, God told me to worship in the pain. God told me specifically that when I am hurting, when I am overwhelmed, that those are the times that I have to remember to worship. And I almost blew it this morning. Before first service, I was standing back in the back, and I usually stand in the back during worship, and I love to worship and put my hands up and just get into that moment of worshiping God. And I was standing back there, and I started thinking about the funeral this afternoon. I started thinking about Donnie and Vicky, and I started thinking about the message and everything else. And I was like, I've got to go clear my mind. So I went back, and I grabbed my microphone and my iPad, and I was like, shoot, I'll just go backstage, and I'll stand back here. And Campus Safety was standing back there at the door. Rusty was back there, and he was like, do it, Pastor. And he'd give me the fist bump. And I walked out the door, and I got about halfway down the hallway, and I went, I'm hurting. Now's the time to worship. And I walked back in the auditorium, and Rusty was like, okay. And I walked back in, and I stood in the back, and I worshiped. And what God did to me is He restored inside of me to understanding that what I said earlier, when things get overwhelmed, when things in our life get so stinking busy and we feel like that this idea of resting in God, this idea of saying, God, I can cast all my cares on you, it just seems like God's so busy sometimes, does He even have time to think about me? So what I do so often, especially as a pastor, is I go, hey God, just scoot over just a little bit. I can't do that too many times, it hurts. Just scoot over and let me just one cheek on your throne, and I'll help you out with what you're doing. So for me, Rest reveals the condition of your heart. And by the way, y'all heard mine, it's you too. So David, who wrote most of the Psalms, most of these beautiful poetry things that were turned into songs in the Old Testament, in Psalm 46, he makes this statement. You've seen it before. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. The repeated calls to meditate and contemplate and consider the things of God, that requires rest. The idea, if you try to do your quiet time in the morning by having your quiet time going while you're trying to figure out your calendar, while you're trying to put together the spreadsheet for work, while you're trying to get your kids breakfast and lunch and everything else, and you're listening to the Bible going, yeah, God, that's good. All right, here we go. And then, wait, God, you want me to do what? All right, wait a minute, over here. All right, dear God, please don't let us die while I'm driving and making a lunch at the same time. If that is your day, if that is who you are and you're not intentionally taking time, are you answering this right here? Are you being still? How many of y'all struggle being still? Raise your hands real high if you struggle being still. Why? I'm not talking about if you have the ADDs and the ADHDs and all the other A's and D's and all the other words that are in there. I'm talking about being able to just go, hey, God, I know you're in charge. Why? See, if we are not taking intentional time to say, God, it's your universe, I'm in it, we're missing out on what God has best for us. And this idea of Sabbath, I'm not trying to give you a bunch of commands. God didn't sit up here, that's Old Testament, that's the Levitical law, that's the Jews of the Old Testament, the Hebrew commands that are in there of saying, do this day and do this day and do this day. And then the Pharisees, the guys who wanted to make extra rules, they added another 600 rules to what you're supposed to do on the Sabbath day. I'm not talking about that. I'm not even telling you your Sabbath time has to be on a Sunday or a Saturday. You got to pick the time. Paul says in 1 Corinthians later on, don't esteem one day above another. I'm telling you to pick out a time that you can say, I am going to intentionally take time to rest. If you can't do it, what does it say about your heart? I ran across this statement. Sometimes I give mine, sometimes I find other ones. I ran across this one. It's not mine, but I loved it. It says this: if anything totally consumes us to the point that we cannot set it down, it's an idol. Tony, I just can't stop and Sabbath rest. All right? Something in your life has become an idol. Well, you don't understand my schedule. You're right, I don't. You don't understand mine either. It's an idol if you can't set it down. So, I've given you a couple things. I hope you're not feeling terrible yet, but I'm going to keep on rolling, okay? Not only does rest reveal the conditions of our heart, here's the next thing. Rest leads us to worship. So please understand that when we talk about the idea of coming to church together, good jump. When we talk about coming to church together, this is not the Sabbath day. We talked about this a little bit last week. The Sabbath day is Saturday, established by the Jewish nation in the Old Testament, established by God. 6 days he worked, seventh day he rested. That's Saturday. But for New Testament Christians, those of us that are believers and give our life to God, we're following Jesus, and the early church began to worship on the first day of the week. That's Sunday. So on Sunday when we gather, we're celebrating Resurrection Day. So when we're here, this is part of Sabbath. This is part of worship. I'm not calling this a Sabbath day. I'm talking about you taking time to rest. It's you taking the time to say, it is worth my time to invest, to be around other believers. It's worth my time to worship corporately, to trust God, to be a part of giving in worship, to be a part of serving in worship. And I've had people ask me many times since we started doing 2 services together. Y'all look around, there's empty chairs, right? There's empty chairs around you. So we have 2 services on Sunday morning. We don't have to do 2 services. We have enough people in 2 services, and we have enough chairs. We could put everybody in 1 service together. Our reasoning for doing 2 services is so that people can attend a service and they can serve and bless other people in another service. And we do that intentionally so that you can have time to rest. You can have time to recharge. You can have time to worship as part of your Sabbath rest that you're taking, and then you can also serve and allow other people to have that opportunity as well. So that's the reason we do 2 services, if you ever wondered why we do that. But rest always leads to worship. Remember, the Old Testament, they worshiped on Saturday. New Testament, as Christians, we worship on Sundays. And maybe Sunday is not a great time for you to say, other than church, it's not really good rest. Because tomorrow's school, we got to do lunches. If you like to meal prep, if you like to get all of your schedules done, maybe you do your grocery shopping, that may not be a good time. But this idea of Sabbath rest, this idea of this rhythm that God puts in our life has to be deliberate. It has to be intentional if it's going to work. And it has to be scheduled. It has to be something that you say is so important for me and for my family that it's something I look forward to, and I work towards. I strive toward it. I work toward this. But this idea of worship is, well, let me say it this way. Worship allows us to hit the pause button and focus in only one direction. Worship allows us to just pause for a moment. And again, I love worshiping corporately, and the Bible teaches about worshiping corporately, but you should also have times of worship on your own as well. So let me give you the last thing. And as I'm starting to talk about this, I've asked Keith and some other guys, this is going to be the really practical part where you're going to kind of make a commitment. If you guys don't mind, just pass those things around. They're going to hand you a little calendar. And a lot of you are going, paper calendars? You're just killing trees. Well, we're killing caves or something by carrying these little computers. So every family, we're going to do our best to try to get everybody one of these, but at least one per family, guys. It's a calendar. It's the last week of January and the whole month of February. And I'm going to tell you why while they're passing these out. Because the last thing I want to share with you this morning is this. Rest forces us to trust God to provide. Rest always forces us to trust God to provide. In Exodus 18 in the Old Testament, Moses is telling the people about manna that's going to be coming from heaven, how God's going to provide this manna from heaven, and how on the sixth day He's going to provide a double portion because the seventh day He wants them to rest. He's establishing this Sabbath again and again. Rest forces us to trust God. It forces us to stop. It forces us to acknowledge that we're not the center of the universe, that it's God. There's a New Testament principle that corresponds to this Old Testament principle that we're going to talk about next week. Because so often people will say, but I've got to work more, but I've got to do more. And you're not deliberately taking time to rest, and you're falling apart for it. And you're asking questions like, how come there's no peace in my life? How come I struggle every single week to find time to just, because you're not deliberately choosing it. So here's your opportunity. Most everybody's probably got one of these by now, and if you don't, they're working their way back, and hopefully you'll have one here in just a second. I'm just going to keep talking until I see that they made it to the back of the auditorium. I'm going to talk about everything like, yeah, here we go. They're working, they're moving fast. They're going, here they go. They're good. All right, I'm just going to stop, all right? So they're passing these calendars around. I told you when we started, I'd give you a main idea, which I have. I told you we'd get very practical with this idea of rest or Sabbath, and then I would give you a chance to make on paper a commitment to what you just heard. So I'm going to give you a statement. Put that up on the screen for me if you will. Rest that is not planned rarely becomes a priority. So look at that again and let it sink in. If you don't plan to rest, it will not become a priority in your life. If you don't intentionally say, me and my family, or if you're single, you're whole and you're complete. If that's you, if you don't intentionally say, I am going to plan a time this week that I'm going to set everything aside. I'm going to set my phone aside. And I get it. You got small children at home. Begin the practice. Maybe it's going to last 2 minutes. That's fine. Intentionally say, we're going to do this. Cut the TV off. Remove the screen time, your own screen time and your kids' screen time. And you're like, that's the only time they're quiet. Just remove it for a couple of minutes. Maybe build up to 20 minutes, to 30 minutes, to an hour. Begin the process of saying, I am going to unplug and I'm going to just sit in the presence of God. Doesn't mean you got to stare at each other. Maybe it's a family game night. Maybe it's you sit around and you read a passage of Scripture and you just acknowledge as a family that the world doesn't revolve around us. Maybe it's a time that you laugh and you dream. You talk about fun things in the past and fun things you want to do forward. Maybe, listen, you can Google search fun things to do as a family. You can do anything you want to find it. But if you don't plan this, it won't happen. So, you got a calendar in front of you, and this is just for you to take with you. Matter of fact, this statement's on the top of your calendar. What night? What night? Look at it. Go ahead, look down at your paper. If anybody's looking at me, you're not obeying the pastor, and may the fleas of 1,000 camels infest your armpits. All right? So just look down at your paper. Look down at your paper. Which night? When are you going to pick? When are you going to say, I am going to deliberately take time with me, with my family? I am going to deliberately set aside time. And I'm not talking about every night at 8 o'clock when the kids go to bed. We're going to no, that's not what I'm talking about. Those are rhythms of life. This needs to be intentional. When you begin to do this, because you got the paper in front of you, and a lot of you are like, I don't use paper. Then, all right, when you're done looking at the paper, just, pity the pastor and look at your paper. You can put it on your phone. But I promise you this, if you don't plan it, it won't be a priority and it won't happen. So find a time. Because here's what I know. All right? This is the part of the service where the pastor gets quiet and he's trying to make a really good point. Okay? Listen. Here's what I know. God thinks more of you than you can possibly imagine. God knows the rhythm of your life. God created rest for you. God created in each and every one of your lives the ability to set everything aside, to focus on Him, to Sabbath, and to rest. And I will promise you that if you make this one of the commitments of your life, God will show up. I wonder what it would look like. I wonder what it would look like if everybody said, I think I'm going to do this. I wonder how the rest of your life would flow through this day instead of just, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. Because see, we're promised. This is just a picture. It's just a picture of eternity. It's what God offers us. We understand that the Bible teaches us that this is the only time that we get the opportunity to choose God. We're the only creation. I said this last week. We are the only thing that God created that He created with choice. Everything else worships and lives and goes about life out of instinct. But God gave human beings the ability to choose. We were created in the image of God. In the image of God, we were created. So God gives us the opportunity to choose. You don't have to do a darn thing I told you this morning because it's your choice to do it. You don't have to accept Jesus while you're in this life. You don't have to give your life to Him. You don't have to. But you need to know, and you're going to know if I'm standing here, that if you don't make that choice, there is a consequence to your choice. See, the Bible does talk about eternity. It does talk about heaven. It does talk about hell. It talks about them being real places. Heaven is a place of rest. Hell is a place of torment. The only time you'll ever get to choose that is on this earth. That's part of rest. What's your choice? And then practically today, did you find a day? Did you look on there and go, man, Tuesday nights might work, Thursday night, I'm going to do it today. Before the football games come on, I'm going to look today and I'm going to find the time. And I'm going to say, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to begin to practice it every week. Watch and see what God would do with your life. Let me pray for you. God, I love you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for the baptisms this morning, for people that are making a commitment to follow you. God, I pray that as we continue next week with this study on rest and the rest of the year, that we will make time with you such a priority in our life that God, no matter what happens in our life, we'll be able to start off by saying, my life is going to revolve around a rest with God instead of making the rest of everything else this fall. So God, I'm going to trust you. God, we love you this morning. Thank you for people that are here. I just pray that your words will speak to people's hearts the way that they need to speak to them, and we trust you with that. It's in your name I pray. Amen.